Welcome, welcome everyone. We will go ahead and get started. It is 5:31 and we want to keep looking at my Hi, I'll get you on. We don't want to keep anybody waiting. We have an awesome hybrid program. Right now we've got about 25 participants online and a handful in person with our wonderful guest speaker. This is our What Does Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Mean in a Master Gardener program presentation. My name is Vanessa Venturini. I'm a staff person here at Cooperative Extension, and I have the pleasure of leading the Master Gardener program in Rhode Island, where we are small but mighty, and we've been working on social justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work since 2020, trying to make some intentional efforts around how can we make a more inclusive program that allows gardening and volunteerism to be available to all. There is a handout that goes along with tonight's presentation, and Matt, if you don't mind popping that in the chat, we have it in front of us. And here, I will mention that if you turn your camera on and if you speak, we can hear you here in the room. And so the first part of the program will be a little bit more kind of talking, and the second part will be more interactive. So we kind of want to set the stage in the beginning, and this part will be recorded because we hope to share this with some other colleagues. We do have folks on the call from other states who are involved in leading their Master Gardener program, so welcome to those, as well as the wonderful Master Gardener volunteers who are here. I was just saying, we've presented this more nationally, I think, than we have to our own Master Gardeners, so we're really excited to have this event and have it be a safe learning space for everybody. And I had the pleasure of talking to Dr. Edwin Rogers, and I learned so much, so I can't wait to learn more, and I will go as quickly as I can through these background things that we can get to the good stuff, the discussion. So I will move on just for a little bit of background. When we say JEDI, we mean Social Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. It's an acronym that our College of Environment and Life Sciences started using for better or for worse. So we're using it for now. We are really open. We kind of want to just say that we're open to learning. We know that what we are doing isn't perfect. I am learning all of this as we go, as are all of the volunteers involved with this so far. People come from all different kind of areas of learning with this work, and we acknowledge that. And it's very humbling and very fulfilling, at least for me. What we really want to do is weave these concepts of JEDI throughout the entire program. We've been working on it since 2020, so we're actually in our 4th year. And the process that we've been using is kind of outlined here, where we're sort of like, all right, we want to tackle this. Let's bring some people together who are doing this work. At the time, we were doing a little bit of work around like how do we have more Spanish-speaking materials and programming. So we recruited volunteers. And then we convened a working group and we said, all right, let's set some legitimate goals here. We worked with Dr. Ravello from the Community Equity and Diversity Office here at the campus. She was like, you can set real SMART goals and see where you go so that you can kind of track your progress, evaluate it, and then revisit those goals, set new goals, and move forward. So this is sort of this iterative process. We don't see an end point to it. We see that it's constantly evolving, especially as different people come and go. So we started with about 30 to 40 people involved in our first round of like our JEDI task force that's been working on setting goals. And then we have these little working groups that actually carry out the goals. And we have almost completely different group working on them now in our 4th year. So it's been kind of cool. And then as new people join the program, they get involved. We've had different people get involved at different leadership levels. And what I'm showing here with the arrows on the outside is that we're always welcoming people in. And it shouldn't just be this task force that's doing the work. And in fact, it's not. If you read the handout, we're trying to do this at all levels of the program. Slow and steady wins the race. And we're inviting you in and for you to kind of get some more understanding around this. And we hope that you'll join us. It's not a requirement for folks to be involved in this, but we did add it to our volunteer agreement. So it's at that level right now. We're not requiring anything, but we invite folks to be involved. And so who's involved? We've got our incredible Extension Master Gardener volunteers, folks who serve at a leadership level. So we've got a leadership council, our staff team, our undergrad interns, our faculty, our community partners, and then our colleagues in other states who are actually here on the call tonight, and who we all learn from and we bounce ideas off of. And in terms of community partners, we've done some beautiful things, building reciprocal relationships with libraries and schools and other organizations that are led. When we say community-based organizations, we mean orgs that are led by the population that that are being served. So Pettiquamscot Community Gardens is featured here, and that's Shirley Brown. She on the left, she actually went through the Master Gardener course, and she's serving as a leader within that community garden and food growing organization that serves the Indigenous population. And we call that peer educators, folks who kind of go through the training and then bring that information and knowledge and resources back to their community. So that's a bit of background on that. Since the first part of the program will be recorded and the second won't, but in the second portion, when we're speaking, I just wanted to go over a few of these community agreements. We do this in our core training, and you may have seen it before. And so we'll just go over them again. In terms of when you're speaking, you want to use I statements, stories stay here, lessons leave with us, trusting intent and owning impact, defaulting to the fact that all participants are speaking with productive intentions, but also owning if your unintended impacts when harm is named. Taking space and making space. This is a big one, like making sure that everyone who wants to be heard is heard, and acknowledging that with more privilege, it's often easier to take space, and then being present and practicing self-care. Before I move on, I just want to point out this little handout. On the front, we kind of talk about why are we weaving Jedi throughout the program, and then below that, we bullet out different initiatives and ways that we've kind of had an impact so far. And then you can kind of see that they're separated into program-wide initiatives, how we've developed community partnerships, continuing ed, which we see as our way of working with our changing culture in the organization and our incumbent volunteers, and then things that we've done around our core training for onboarding new volunteers. And then we've got some language on the second page. Of course, you're not gonna be able to read that right now, but it's things to take home and give you a little bit more concrete, because sometimes this stuff can be really heady and academic, and it's like, what are you actually talking about? And so here are the concrete steps. And this whole session was brought about because people came to us and they asked some questions, and we said, let's have a conversation about this. Let's move forward, because it's really important to us that our entire organization, there have been people who've been involved in this program. I mean, it's a 45-year-old program that have been involved in it, has a second career almost. Hi, yay, she's here in person. Welcome, welcome. And I just want to acknowledge the person who just walked in the room, Maria Barasalian, as she gets settled. She is the coordinator for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion on our leadership council, and has done an incredible job of leading these efforts alongside the team that we have. So without further ado, I will thank Dr. Sean Edmund Rogers for coming here in the 11th hour, because we are so lucky to have him here at the university in one role that he actually is culminating at the end of this month, and he will be our incumbent dean of the College of Business, which is huge. So that's why we're like, we gotta get this event in by the end of May. So congrats to you. Right now, though, for a short couple weeks, Sean is the URI's Chief Diversity Officer and VP of Community Equity and Diversity for the entire university. He is in the College of Business, where he's the Spachman Professor of Human Resources and Labor Relations and Professor of Management. And he previously served as Executive Director of Inclusive Excellence for the college, among other things. And you've done a lot of research around, organizational change and even volunteerism, which was so exciting to me. You've written some books. In fact, we were looking on your shelf, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that. So I have a few kind of prepared questions. I'm going to stop sharing now that I will open up. And my first question is, can you tell us a little bit about kind of your work in this and how you think it might be relevant to a community engagement organization like the Master Gardener program. A little bit about your research and background as it relates to organizational change, volunteer management, and equity efforts. Welcome.
Okay, thank you so much, Vanessa, and thank you all for having me. It's such a pleasure. I had a chance to meet most of the individuals in the room personally, and for the folks who walked in, it's such a pleasure meeting you, and hopefully I'll have the chance to get to know you better. And then the folks who are joining us virtually, thank you so much for dialing in. I actually won't speak too much about my research. It's kind of late in the day, and who wants to hear an academic kind of talk about research at 5, 6 p.m.? But I do want to talk about the topic of the day, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I want to start by thanking you. I want to start by thanking you for inviting me to be with this great group. And I want to thank you for taking time to even have this discussion. It's so important. It's so important to even recognize and make space for these types of conversations, right? So thank you all for being here. You asked a lot of questions in that question. So, as I think about which part to tackle, maybe I'll go right into why do we care about any of this? Why are we even having this conversation, right? And that'll kind of lead into the work that I do. Why do you care about diversity, equity, and inclusion in any organization or organizational initiative or effort, right? The title of the presentation was, what does justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion mean in an MG program? I think it means what justice, equity, and diversity and inclusion means in any organizational program, which is to make sure that we are creating a space, creating an organizational environment where all individuals can feel welcomed, feel as though they belonged, and feel as though they can fully participate.
Sorry, one moment. I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you mind moving that way a little bit? For some reason, the camera is not.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure.
You're the most important. Go on.
I can scoot down a couple of
Beautiful. So sorry to
seats.
interrupt you.
If I sit here, will it capture me?
Does that look better, folks in Zoom world? Okay, thumbs up I'm getting. So.
And you spent so much time bragging on the technology in this room.
It always works best when Ian's here.
Yeah, no, we're gonna have to get on Dean Lorette, but
Don't sit there.
I know.
Sorry, go on.
But in addition to creating sort of a climate of belonging, it's really also about creating access, right? Creating access for people to be able to participate. And so how do you do those two and other things? You have to be intentional. I gave a TED Talk a couple years ago, maybe now, where I talked about the key to effective diversity and inclusion is really intentionality. It is asking questions about who's in the room or who's in the program, who's participating, and why, right? Why am I here? Why are others here? And what might be some of the barriers that are preventing any other individuals from engaging in this experience and this learning environment that we are benefiting from, right? So when you think about the work that you do, and you've got a lot here, and we're going to tackle, hopefully we'll have time to sort of tackle some of this. One sort of running thread that I want you to keep in mind is intentionality, right? Being intentional about what we're doing, who's participating, and what we're working towards. And I think that's really, really key. So I'll kind of wrap it up with that word intentionality, and that'll be sort of a running thread that you hear me maybe mention multiple times tonight.
Awesome. And I have the next question. It's a little long, but
yeah, sure.
I'm going to say, so our organization nationally, so there is a Master Gardener program in every state. We're relatively homogenous. So there was a study done in 2018 encompassing 72% of the state programs, about 7,500 volunteers. The volunteers were primarily white, female, educated, retired, of economic means, and with a mean age of 65 years and service averaging 7.7 years. And so in 2018, our program matched this profile pretty well. Every year, this was when we held the program in person, people would look around the classroom and come up to me, and a few people would come up to me and say, why is everybody looking the same in this room? And so I didn't have a good answer to that. And that was one of my main motivations in this role for diving into the work when we started it. So when we met earlier this year, you shared some of the group dynamics that lead to why groups become relatively homogenous. So it's not really like nobody did anything wrong. It's just sort of like a social norm, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah. So, when I talk about diversity and inclusion, a lot of times I ask some pretty pointed questions, not necessarily seeking a response, but just throwing questions out in the universe for you to consider as we have this discussion. Now, when you hear stats like that, maybe the natural question to ask is why? Why does the program look the way it does, and why does the composition, why is the composition what it is? I'm going to ask a more pointed question. Is that a problem? Mm-hmm. Is what you're seeing a problem? Are the statistics problematic? Right? One of the things that you'll hear people ask is, what are we trying to fix? Right? In academia, we always talk about problematizing an issue because then we try to solve it, right? In business, I worked in business before going back to academia, you'd always ask, well, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? If we're going to throw advertising or dollars towards an advertising campaign, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? Not enough purchases of a product or what? So I ask you rhetorically, is the composition of the Master Gardener program at URI and elsewhere nationally a problem? Maybe, maybe not. It could be a problem, and when I describe it as a problem, this is not necessarily to say you've got a bad guy or someone who made a nefarious decision that led to the circumstance. I'm just saying it's a problem in the way that there might exist barriers that prevent desired outcomes. That's what I mean when I'm saying a problem, right? So if you say it is a problem, maybe it is a problem because there are others who don't necessarily fit a profile who might want to participate in the program, right? If those folks are not out there, then okay, right? But if those folks are out there and we're not creating space or opportunities for them to participate, then maybe we have a problem in our organization, right? The composition is not the problem. The people who are currently participating are not the problem, but there's something underlying in the organizational structure and the policies and whatever else that exclude others from participating, and that might be a problem, for example, right? And you could go on and on, right? You can iterate in this way and kind of identify a number of different things. And let's take that one, for example. So if that is a problem, then how do we solve that problem? Because as far as I'm concerned, right, if that is a problem, then that is a problem worth solving, right? A lot of the work in DEI is about framing and how you think about things. If I look at the group, look, I'm a professor in the College of Business. In the University of Rhode Island College of Business, I'm one of 4 Black professors out of 80 faculty members. If you look at that as a problem from the perspective of why are the numbers so low relative to the labor market, relative to even the population, then you've got an organizational challenge that you can go after and potentially solve. Are there barriers to entry into this organization? I'm trying to solve a barrier. I'm not trying to solve the existing people who are in the organization, because the people are not a problem. The problem is a lot of DEI work problematizes people. You problematize me for living in the community that I live in. Is it my problem that I live in this community and others who look like me don't live in the community? Or is it a larger issue, right? Is the composition of the MG program nationally the problem of the people who participate, or are there underlying issues that we might need to deal with? Now, what you're seeing there, the sort of relative homogeneity of this program, is not unique to the Master Gardener program, right? This is what leadership professor Rosabeth Moss Kanter at the Harvard Business School called in the 1970s homosocial reproduction, right? That is, organizations tend to look relatively homogeneous because they end up being a reflection of the individuals who comprise the membership. And the reason that this happens is because when we tend to recruit, or when we tend to invite people to participate, or when we tend to do things, we tend to do things in spaces that tend to reflect us, right? That's just how things work socially, sociologically, right? That's why communities in America are still largely segregated, right? Houses of worship in America are largely segregated along racial lines, racial and ethnic lines. It was Martin Luther King who said the most segregated time in America is Sunday morning. We all go in our separate houses and we do these things. So these are sort of natural dynamics that play out. The problem is the natural dynamics tend to be rather exclusionary, right? Or can be, not purposefully necessarily, but they just do, right? They end up being exclusionary. And so a lot of the things that I'm reading here are attempts to push back and disrupt nature, right? Nature. That is, there are theories, social identity theory, self-categorization theory, all these theories that explain why groups tend towards homogeneity. And you've got to have policies and practices in place that bump against that natural sort of order, if you will. And so it is going, you showed some photos, right? Going into communities that we might not typically go into, right? Introducing gardening to young people in schools where gardening might not be discussed all that often, right? It's not sort of just one of the topics that typically, makes it in front of kids in certain communities and other things, right? So, what you see in the MG program here and nationally is basically what you see in all types of organizations everywhere, right? And one of the keys is, going back to the word I started with, intentionality. How do you disrupt the natural processes that lead to homosocial reproduction and homogeneous organization? And it is through many of the activities that you've outlined
Yeah, and So we talked about that, and we see, there's a lot of organizations out there looking to diversify, not just a Master Gardener program. Although with extension, and we're part of cooperative extension, the land grant university system, we're actually required, because we get federal funding, to serve all, residents, because we get the public funding, so we want to do the greatest possible public good. And so we actually get audited every so often to make sure that we're making all efforts to reach every population. But it goes beyond the requirements. And so can you share more about why would an organization want to diversify? Can we dig into that a little?
Yeah, absolutely. That was a question I was actually going to ask you all. Again, not necessarily seeking a response, but knowing what we just described about all organizations, including ours, why would you want to change it? What's the motivation to expand? You've gotten your first paragraph, here a lot of reasons why you might want to pursue diversity and inclusion goals in the program, right? Not only extending opportunities to diverse groups, but also enhancing our own experiences in education, right? Because it's a two-way street and we all learn from this diverse ecosystem. Why would you want to do it? You've got to, that's a question that you really have to reflect on and look inwardly and ask, what are we going after? What are we trying to achieve? You talked about on an earlier slide, goals and goal setting. I'm a management professor. I like goals, right? We talk about goals a lot, right? I think in a group like this, again, to make sure that we're not inadvertently, because I think this is an important point. Although you certainly have some groups that are purposefully exclusionary. These sort of what we call in-group and out-group dynamics that happen naturally happen sort of just like waves, right? It's nature, right? It's not that we're like purposefully pushing people out. It just happens, right? And so when that happens, we have to then intentionally say, well, what are we going to do about this? And then we have to, you go to Panera Bread, you pick two, right? I pick two. You have to identify what are a couple of the things you're going to go after, and then you have to go after them well, right? One thing, one sort of hiccup that I really see when people are doing when people are pursuing, or organizations or groups are pursuing diversity and inclusion goals, is that they lay out everything, right? They lay out the universe of possibilities that we can do, and then they just try to do it all, right? A grand challenge in the United States is that we haven't figured out really how to do much of what we're talking about here. So how is it that the URI Master Gardener program is going to figure out what nations and states and organizations, Fortune 500 employers, just haven't been able to figure out? You're not, you're great people, you're very smart people, you're not going to figure it out. You're not going to figure it all out. So what I encourage groups to do is pick two. Pick a couple of things that get after disrupting the homogeneity and the inadvertent exclusion, what we call in sort of legal parlance, adverse impact, right? That gets at some of the adverse impact, and then try to solve that, right? And once you solve a couple of things, or at least make significant progress, then pick a couple other things, right, to go after, right? The challenge of diversity and inclusion and disrupting sort of natural organizational systems is hard work. It takes a ton of effort. It takes repeated focus and attention and intentionality. There's no way you can go after, I would argue, 7 or 10 organizational goals well in the diversity and inclusion space. You just can't do it. You can't do it well. You'd be hard pressed to really put your hands around 2 or 3 at one time. But I think, that is more manageable and maybe something that you do, right? So to your question of why you do it, well, why you do it is because we want to minimize the inadvertent exclusionary practices that might exist through, I would argue, no intentional fault of our own. It's just what happens, right? You want to minimize that disparate impact. You want to open up access. You want to make sure that people aren't shut out. People can be shut out not only by sort of where we go and where we recruit in our practices, but also just by a lack of knowledge, right? A lack of information, right? A lack of familiarity. I'm from inner city Los Angeles. I had not heard, and I went to kind of a technical university that didn't have a lot of arts and humanities majors. I had not heard the word sociology or even knew it as a field of study until I enrolled in my PhD studies in my 30s. Mm-hmm. I had not heard the word sociology until my mid-30s. I'm approaching 50 now. Right? So I spent the most of my life not even knowing that there was something called sociology or anthropology or a number of other things, because we don't talk about sociology in Inglewood, California, South Central Los Angeles. You don't talk about sociology. You talk about living to the next day. You certainly don't talk about anthropology. So, part of this is, again, taking this great word and experience that we have to places that probably aren't familiar with it, right? And why do you do that? Because you've got something great, right? That's why you're participating. That's why you're here. That's why you're here today, but that's why you really participate in the MG program, because you have something that is enriching to your lives, right? You have something that is fulfilling for you personally, that enables the creation of friendships and bonds that pour into your lives in multiple ways, not only having to do with gardening, but in multiple ways, right? And this is sort of a light that deserves to be shared widely across the state and beyond, right? And that's, why we do this, at least one of the reasons why we do this.
That's beautiful. We live in a really socially isolated time, and whenever I hear those statistics and about how you live longer based on how many social connections you have and based on whether you have that meaningful outlet, I'm like, yay, I love what we do. It really is. There's so many, health outcomes related to volunteering or connecting with your community. So I totally am on board with that. That's great. 2 more things before we open it up. I'd like for a moment, we have some folks involved in this work on the call, others who are newer to it. But I'd like to focus for a moment on communication. So I've received feedback from some of our volunteers, whether it's newer folks or people who've been involved for a long time. Maybe it seems like we put too much emphasis on this work, or that it's too political. And sorry, I'm gonna throw that one at you. What would you say to that kind of feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the conversation of diversity and inclusion can get quite political. It can get quite polarizing, right? But I would argue that that's more that's a caricature of DEI, if you will, right? So if you go to what we're talking about, what we just talked about, it's hard to politicize that. It's hard to politicize. I have a life enriching experience that I want to share with other people. I don't care if you're right, left, or whatever, right? That's a good thing, right? That's a good thing. And now you can take it in a number of different directions, but then you're sort of, I would argue, morphing it into something that's less helpful. I think really, and again, I kind of live and breathe this work, and many of my colleagues are working in states, either in the Midwest or in the South or in the South, other places, where they are dealing with really sort of challenging operating environments. Thankfully, here in Rhode Island and some other states, you don't have to deal with it to that degree. Mm-hmm. If you focus on the core, and let's take it to the MG, let's take it specifically to the MG program. If you really focus on expanding opportunities, reducing barriers, minimizing exclusion, again, and you keep it there, and you keep your initiatives and your practices and your, whatever there. I think that's one way that you can sort of avoid getting into, the larger messiness of it all, right? And again, let me use the word intentionality. You've got to intentionally kind of keep it there. In my space, when we're doing things around the university, there are a lot of, even when I'm engaged in discussions, a lot of comments or a lot of things are said that could really pull my office's work out of a laser focus on certain objectives and goals and into this just muck of an argument, discussion, or what have you. I'm very intentional with, what, maybe that's a discussion for another day, but right now we're dealing with this, right? And I've been sort of a unique sort of, just a unique person in this role, because it's the first time that you have sort of really a business type person in this role. I got my PhD in HR, but my corporate career was in industrial engineering and finance, right? So, and so I tackle a lot of DEI issues even on this campus, from a frame of finance, from a frame of industrial organization, from a frame of sort of system objectives, optimization, and whatever else. And so when we're dealing with things, I take this, hey, we're going to pick a few things that get at some of the larger goals that we're trying to get at, and we're going to focus on and figure out how to do these well. And and what that does is, I'm not going to say shut down, but what that does is keep me out of other conversations. I'm not going to say they're unimportant conversations, but that keeps me laser focused. And I believe keeps us as an institution laser focused on certain desired outcomes, right? So under my tenure, for example, we've staffed up the majority of college level diversity officers, something we've been talking about for a long, long time. We have made a number of gains on this campus that have been worked on literally for 30 years and more that haven't been able to happen. We've pushed them through, right? We've brought them to fruition because of this sort of dogged focus on what are we trying to get at, why, and how do we actually do that? And let's kind of not get sidetracked, right? I'm rambling on here in true professorial fashion. So let me wrap it up here by just saying, it's really easy to get sidetracked when you're talking about this. So my advice would be, when you're, when you're coming up with objectives, really just lay out, hey, what are we going after? What are those 2 or 3 things, or those few things that we're going after? And we understand the why of why we're going after. Let's just stick to it. Let's stick to this. This is our objective, just like anything else, right? If I were running sort of engineering or financing in a firm, I would stick to the goal, right? This is the target. This is the quarterly or the annual target. This is what we're going after. Yeah, we're flexible and agile enough to adjust if need be, but this is what we're going after. And when you're doing DEI work in the MG program, or more generally, identify what it is you're going after and then just go after it. And anything that kind of takes you off course, say, hey, is this the right conversation to be having? is this, if not, let's get back on course. This is our objective. You run this just like anything else, right? You've got membership goals, right? Maybe for the number of volunteers that you want to attract. And then you all set out a plan and you have careful sort of practices that allow you to go after that. You've got financial goals. You've got to think about how to fund the activities that you engage in. You go after that in a very methodical way. This the same way, right? You go after this in a very methodical, thoughtful, reflective way, and try not to get sidetracked and pulled into the other stuff. It's hard. It is hard, but I think you have to approach this with the same level of purpose and deliberation as anything else.
I love that. And I think in the conversation you and I had, one thing that I just want to reiterate is you said focus on the activity of gardening and service to the community and giving back rather than the demographics. So that said a lot to me as well. So
yeah, and I think that, people get lost in the, so, not to use any sort of cliche terms or what have you, but DE&I is a means to an end, just like anything else within an organization, right? And sort of the end is to have a thriving MG program, again, where people are experiencing these fulfilling, beneficial experiences and relationships, right? The same way that you have to fund your activities to be able to do this, the same way that you have to get volunteers to be able to do this, well, you have to engage in diversity and inclusion. The problem is, a lot of people set this as the end goal, right? Okay, so you have a representative. Think about the stats. Okay, we have equal or proportional representation. Now what? I know a lot of proportional representation organizations that run like crap and aren't fulfilling for their members. Was that the end goal? No, that wasn't the end goal. Right? The end goal is what we've been discussing, right? So this is just a through point, right? This is, okay, yeah, you do this to get to that, just like you do a number of other things. This is one of many organizational activities we do to get to this larger goal, right? That's what we're shooting for, but you can't get this fully and for as diverse and inclusive a group as possible if you're not doing this well, if you're not doing this DEI piece well. But this is not the end goal, right? This is just one of many activities that you're engaged in to create those fulfilling relationships and meaningful experiences.
Good. So we're going to open this up to be more of a conversation. So for folks in Zoom world, the way that you can contribute with questions, comments, thoughts is to raise your hand. There's a little reactions button. I think it looks like a smiley face. You can click that, or you can turn your camera on and raise your hand. We'll be watching, or anyone in the room, and we'll kind of take it from there. Any initial thoughts or questions? And actually, I will stop recording at this point because we do want this to feel like a safe space. So let me figure out how to do that.